All right, everyone, excited for this segment. What we're going to do today is we're going to have a very nuanced conversation discussing the sandwich generation and then, Gene, as you described it, the senior sandwich generation. And I think here's the frame for this. When we interviewed Jean several months ago, we were talking about a lot of what she discussed in her new book, Women with Money. In that book, to her credit, she pointed out that financial independence doesn't just affect you. That change in status affects both your kids, but also your parents. And as you reach a certain point in age, you're having conversations on both sides because you don't know what your parents' finances are and how they're going to be handling it, how they're going to be resolving certain situations. And at the same time, you notice that your kids now are accountable for their own finances and they're just starting to be accountable, and you're needing to make sure that they are taking action on those ideas. And there's a balance there to having these conversations. So we didn't have time because we were talking about to really dive into that, but we knew we wanted to have her back on the show. And with that, Jean, welcome to the Choosify podcast. Thanks for coming to Richmond to join us for this.
I am so excited to be here. I mean, this is really impressive what you guys have put together, this studio in Jonathan's bonus room.
Thank you. Yes. It was a labor of love.
Yeah.
You would just finish each week and say, all right, what else can I do?
Yeah, really. I mean, I'm a little intimidated by all the technology and by looking at so many pictures of myself at the same time, but I will get over it.
Wait a second. Which one of us has more time on TV?
Just because you're on TV does not mean that you have to watch yourself on TV.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that's interesting. Lesson learned.
Yeah. So, Gene, this is actually a topic of conversation that is becoming a lot more personal for me. I think I was blissfully unaware in my 20s and 30s of the fact that my parents are getting older. And I think, now I've hit that grand 40 age. And, unfortunately, I've actually had to step in a little bit with some medical doctors for my parents, my dad specifically. And, it's something that's on my mind. And, I'd love for you to just help us build a framework of what does someone, maybe my age, need to start thinking about. How do you start having these conversations with your parents who have been the protectors, the providers forever?
And are not necessarily comfortable having those conversations with you. I think it's a two-step process. The one thing we want to really understand with our parents is how they're situated, right? Avoiding surprises at all possible is kind of the game that we're trying to play. And so if you can get just a sense of whether your parents have saved enough, whether they have long-term care insurance, whether they have paid off their mortgage or perhaps refied because rates went down and they needed some cash, whether they are generally healthy, right? All of these things help you build this picture of, am I likely to step in or am I likely to have to step in? When we look at the competing priorities facing somebody your age or my age, and I've got about 10 years on you, we look at three things. There is retirement for ourselves, and we're hopefully building toward that. At least, creating a nest egg, whether you want to retire in your 40s or whether you want to retire in your 60s, you want to make sure that you've got enough money to support you for as long as you're going to live, which is a number that seems to continue to go up. We look at our kids, and hopefully we get them through college with some assistance from us. Maybe they borrow, but the goal is to get them launched into financial independence. And then we've got our parents. And if our parents need help, that's the one component of the three where we kind of don't have a choice. We have to step in and help, because if it's our own retirement, we can just work a couple more years in many cases. If it's our kids, they can borrow for college. We can help them facilitate that. If it's our parents who are no longer able to work and are in some cases facing a health situation and they need our help, we're going to step in to do it, whether or not it's detrimental to our own financial situation.
Yeah, I mean, when you said that hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt this wave of emotion because I think so many of us, we're aware clearly of our own financial needs and the fact that we're going to have to care for our kids. But, maybe it's just me, but I never contemplated taking care of my parents either health-wise or financially. And that's pretty wild.
Yeah, it hit me too a couple of years ago. My mom and my stepdad are snowbirds. They spend half the year in Florida, half the year and one day in Florida, so they can be Florida residents. And a couple of years ago in January, they got hit with a really bad case of the flu. They were there by themselves. Usually they have this extended community, but everybody had flown east for a funeral of a close friend. And it was kind of on me from New York to figure out what to do, to get a visiting nurse to come on in, to order groceries via the internet, because they couldn't really get up and around. And although I could have gotten on a plane to get there, that didn't seem like the best idea at the time. They didn't really want intruders, and they didn't, not that I'm an intruder, but they didn't, So I think when it hits you, you just sort of wake up and realize, oh, this is coming my way, and I'm going to have to deal with it. And that's when we use those opportunities to really talk to our parents and get them to open up about what they have and what the need is likely to be.
Is there any way to do it before it hits critical mass, before it goes south? I mean, is there any tactics or strategies or even conversation techniques that you could use to open the conversation when it's calm, when everything's totally working ahead of time?
That's optimal. I mean, that's optimal. And there are a couple things you could do. You can use the news, right? You can, some famous person died unexpectedly. Some famous person got sick unexpectedly. That is a way to just say to your parents, oh my God, did you hear about this? And I was thinking about it and it made me think about you. Or did you have a friend who's going through a situation? And even if you don't have a friend, you can just make up that you have a friend who's going through this situation.
Most of us do have some friends.
Yeah, but I mean, even if you don't have a friend who's in the midst of this right now, you can lie a little bit. It's a good lie. There's something also called the 40-70 rule, which I sometimes fall back on. And that is, if you turn 40 or they turn 70 and you haven't had this conversation, you can just say, we gotta do this because there's a 40-70
It's a
rule.
rule.
It's a rule. Right?
That's good.
So there are lots of reasons to do it. I think what many people don't understand is that you don't just do it once. It's not one and done because of the level of discomfort that many parents have with this. You start nibbling around the edges, and then you go deeper, and then you go deeper, and you just keep going until you get to the point where you truly understand what they want and what they have, and how the two of those things will work together, and what they're going to need from you.
The way you frame that, what they want versus what they have, is that actually the approach, the better? When you talk about nibbling, instead of, if you're trying to peel this onion or get down to the core, instead of going to what they have, which is very exposing and personal, right? What they want seems more optimistic and seems like an easier place to start.
I think that's where you start. I think you just start with, have you thought about how you want to live as you get older? Have you thought about, do you want to stay here? A lot of people, I saw a new study. This is a way to get in, right? Mom, I saw this new study that said 75% of people want to stay in their own homes. Do you want to stay? Is this your goal? My mother has been very, very open with me for years about how she is not going to an assisted living community. Like, that is the last thing she wants. And for years she said, I'm just going to give you some money and you'll add on to your house. And I was like, okay, all right. That is giving me, I don't know if that's actually possible, but that's giving me some clear direction of what she wants. And we keep going from there.
And almost as you, and maybe Brad, this is even to you, but almost as you have that initial conversation and they feel that level of comfort, stuff that maybe they've wanted to tell you, but they haven't known how, you're giving them permission to start engaging more.
Absolutely. And I think to your example of going to the doctor with your parents, that is just, I've done that. It is they're opening themselves up to you. And if you can get them to allow you to go into the room with the doctor, because often, and the same thing happens when people go to see a financial professional, we forget in the moment the questions that we want to ask. It's such a good idea to just make a list in advance, to take notes while you're there, and to have another person in the room who's not as emotional as you are. There's this commercial running now about a woman. She looks fairly young. She's like in her 40s, I think. And the doctor says, Claire, it's advanced cancer. And then you see her whole world like blank out around her, because that's exactly what happens when we're in a very stressful situation where we just don't understand what's going to happen next.
So you had this situation where with the flu, right? And your parents had the flu. And how did that conversation go from there? So obviously this is one, acute issue, right?
Yeah, I mean, what was so interesting? So I'm one of three children. I'm the only girl. I'm the oldest. In my nuclear family, that means I'm the one, right? My brothers are going to rely on me to make a lot of these decisions, which is something that I've known forever. My mother married a guy who has three sons. I'm still the one. Like with all these men, it's like they were all calling me. So it became and one of them is a doctor, which is fabulous. But it was clear that, like, okay, everybody was going to tell me what they thought, and then I was going to make these decisions. And so I was just talking, a couple of times a day. My stepfather was less sick than my mother. We had to figure out, are we going to admit her to the hospital, or is a nurse okay? And finally I would just say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Is that okay? Right? Sometimes I think what our parents want least of all, financially or health-wise, is to be a burden, because they still feel it's their responsibility in their 70s and their 80s and their 90s to take care of us, even if we're in our 40s, 50s, 60s. And so sometimes you just have to say, I think this is the right move. This is what I'm going to do. Is that okay? And do it, rather than trying to get them to lead you.
Yeah, I have so many questions, Jean, because like I said, this is intensely personal for me. And so there's six of you.
There's six of us.
Siblings, step-siblings. So now it sounds like you were appointed, right?
Right.
Like de facto. But in many families, how do you advise people having that conversation? Does someone just naturally take the lead? Like, are there topics, are there strategies of how to discuss that?
The example that I've always envied the most, I have a friend who's a financial journalist like me. She has one sister who's a doctor and one sister who's a lawyer. And I was just like, that is perfect, right? Because as her parents aged, they knew exactly she was going to handle the money, her other sister was going to handle legal, and the other one was going to handle medical. And it doesn't really work like that in families. It helps for one person to be the point with doctors, right? To be the point on finances. And yeah, I think everybody sort of has their natural roles in a family, and you should talk about among your siblings, how are we going to handle this? Who's going to check in with the doctor? Who's going to check in with the financial advisor? Who's going to be the power of attorney, so that things don't get confused, wires don't get crossed, and you can function together. Often it is just one person, and everybody else calls that person to get information. And that person, sometimes, if there is a financial need, corrals the financial support from the other people. What I've learned, one of my hats that I wear is as the financial ambassador for AARP, and they've done extensive work in the area of caregiving. And if you become a physical caregiver, if it's no longer a part-time endeavor for you, I think the thing that siblings need to realize the most is that caregiver needs a break. And so if you've got a sibling who is the caregiver, going in and saying, I'm going to be here for a week, you go do something else, is really, really important.
I think many people probably came into this episode with, the twofold, the how do I get started? And then the what do I need to find out? What needs to be accomplished in this? Do I need to get access to their bank accounts? Am I doing their asset allocation for them? Am I making sure they have long-term care insurance? Like, when you actually get past the, what do you want? And then now you're together collaboratively figuring out, how do we make sure that you get there and stay there? What are the types of conversations that really need to be had?
So I think there is an overall financial conversation that needs to be had, and there's a legal conversation that needs to be had. I mean, you do need to understand how your parents are situated financially, as much as they will let you in. And the basic thing that you want to ascertain is, are they living within their means, right? Or are they borrowing? Are they spending down too fast? Are they going to be able to sustain themselves? And maybe that is something that you can do with them on your own. Maybe it's something that if they have a financial advisor, they'll do with the financial advisor and then they can report back. Maybe they'll be willing to allow you to accompany them to the financial advisor. But what you're trying to figure out is, are they essentially moving forward in a way where you won't have to step in financially, or is it the opposite? Legally, you want to make sure they have all the documents in place. Do they have a will? Is it up to date? Do they have powers of attorney? Who has those powers of attorney? Do they have a living will? Have they done the medical directives as well, so that essentially if they had an emergency, could you or someone else in the family step in and take care of their health and their finances? And where is all of this information kept? My stepfather recommends that everybody write something that he calls a letter of instruction and suggestion. The suggestion part is because he likes to tell everybody what to do.
Some things never change.
Yes, but it's a roadmap. It's not a legal document. It's just, if something happens to me, this is the bank, this is the brokerage firm, these are the passwords, or this is the key to the password manager, this is the lawyer, this is the accountant, and it takes you through so that while you're in the midst of this incredible, crazy crisis, you know what to do. It's a really, really, I have one. My husband has one. It's a very kind thing to do for your family and your children.
So, Jean, since you have taken on this role, you're the financial ambassador for AARP, and AARP is an organization that I believe has basically dedicated their sole existence to serving the population that we're describing right now. Can you speak to maybe some of the resources that are available that maybe people hadn't realized are out there that they should be thinking about and could access if they wanted to in regards to this conversation?
They have so much. It's all online, especially geared toward caregiving. If you go to AARP and you search caregiving, you don't even have to search. Like, it's just out there. But you should know there are tons of resources specifically for caregivers. It's a big pillar for them.
And if we were not to get super specific, but just like, when we say resources, what are the things that make this slightly easier? Just at a macro level.
Guides to what to say to help your parents, guides to help caregivers find additional resources to help them. There's a caregiving summit that they do approximately every 18 months. I moderated a panel on advances in technology and for caregivers as consumers that can be helpful, and you can find all of those things online as well.
All right, now I know Brad he's a loop closer, right? And I know we set up this episode or this segment basically saying there's two sides to this equation, and in your words, your kids are about to launch. The conversations that how to have that conversation with your kids as they're launching and assessing that they are taking those appropriate first steps. It may not look exactly like financial independence per se, but at some point, if they're not relying on you, they have achieved a level of that. What are the conversations that we need to have with our kids as they're launching?
We need to talk about, just as we are making sure that our parents are essentially living on what they make, that's the goal for our kids. We want them to understand that they've got this limited resource of money, right? Their paycheck that's coming in, and how they can save for the future and live on the rest. And save for the future comes first, whether the future is short-term and in the form of an emergency cushion or contributions to a retirement plan. They have to have a starter budget. And so I did this recently with my son. He is not even recently, a few years ago, when he got his first job. We sat down and did a budget. And I basically said, all right, before we do this, I want you to spend the next month tracking where your money is going, because budgeting in a vacuum doesn't work. I could say, well, you should spend this on this and you should spend this on this. And if that's not how somebody lives, then this is a budget that is set up to fail. So he did exactly as I asked him to do. This was his, food line. This was his rent line. And he had earmarked $250 a month for Uber. And I said, you have a car.
You have legs.
You have a car. He lives in Los Angeles.
Okay.
I said, you have a car. And he said, yeah, Mom, but when I go out with my friends on the weekends and we drink, we don't drive. And I said, you need $250 a month for Uber.
Let's round that up.
Yeah. So we built this budget that had the $250. I mean, he does not make a ton of money. He does fine, but we built a budget that had that. And we cut back on other things. He joined a cheaper gym. He was running and walking outside. He was cooking a little bit more and making sure that he wasn't eating out 3 times a day. And it all worked, right? But it only worked because he was honest about where he needed his money to go. And we also, in that, he was working for a company that didn't have a retirement plan. We opened a Roth IRA. He started making contributions, off the bat. And he felt like, I really don't have enough money to do this. I said, we're going to start small. You'll start nudging it up. And about a year into it, he looked at the balance and he was like, Mom, I've got money in there. And that's how we become savers, right? Saving money is not fun, but having money saved is a lot of fun. And so you have to give yourself permission to enjoy the success.
So as a financial expert or anyone out there in the audience who's obviously they're up on finances, they think about it because they're listening to the show, they're listening to your show, et cetera. There's that fine line between advising your kids and stepping in and doing it for them, right? Or commanding them, maybe even worse. How do you suggest people navigate that when I know best, right? Like, how do you deal with it?
Oh, it's really hard. The stepping in and doing it for them I struggle with that with my kids just because like your parents want to take care of you. I still want to take care of them. And we have to remind ourselves why and how we learned the financial lessons that have kept us going, right? I learned how to deal with credit card debt and how to handle my credit cards responsibly because when I got out of college, I got in over my head in credit card debt and my parents did not bail me out. They could have bailed me out, but they didn't bail me out. And so I have my daughter is younger than my son. She's in her first job now. And so I have the ability to monitor her balance in her checking account. And so I see when she is getting close to the line, and I will say something like you're getting close to the line, but I won't transfer money to her account. Like it's on her to figure out how do I get through the next 3 days on $20.
Okay. So basically advise and monitor, but don't step in, don't control, don't say Mom knows best.
And be willing. There will be a point where she says to me, get out of my checking account. And I will have to say, okay. When she says that, I will step back. Right now, I feel better watching. I don't know if she feels better watching, knowing that I'm watching, but I feel better watching. And but when she says get out, I will have to be respectful enough to get out.
Jean, people listening to this, they want to connect with you, find out more about what you're working on. Where's the best way for someone to find out more?
I would love it if your listeners went to hermoney.com/sign up. Or just texted the word Her Money to 888-111. We'll get you info about our podcast, Her Money, which comes out every week, and our website. And we've got this unbelievable private Facebook group that is 10,000 strong and growing every day by 100 or more. And it's just women supporting each other about the financial decisions and challenges that we face every single day.
Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me in your studio.
All right, my friends, if you got value from today's episode, take a second and press subscribe on the platform you're listening to this on. Just lets the provider know you're getting value from the show and you want to be here when we produce additional content. If you're getting started on your own path to financial independence, maybe 2020 has kind of punched you in the face from a financial perspective and you're trying to get some momentum going again, go to our webpage, choosefi.com. Check out our learning center and our financial resilience toolkit. Maybe today, maybe this episode, this was the prompt that you needed to start the conversation, but you want to fill in the blanks with some more tactics and strategies. Don't let the moment pass you by. Take action. Go to choosefi.com to get started on your own path to financial independence today. All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.